All right, wonderful. So, looking at cognitive development, the development of the brain, you're expected to know about Piaget's theory. So, Piaget viewed cognitive development as a process of adapting to the external environment around us. So, to define adaptation with regards to Piaget's theory, adaptation involves taking in, processing, and using new information to adapt to change. And this involves cognitive development. So, the definitions that you need to know and differentiate between are assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation is the process of gathering new information and fitting it into a pre existing mental idea. That means filling in the gaps in information to make sense of information we haven't been confronted with before by reflecting on a similar experience or something else that we know to make something make sense. So obviously this doesn't take as much mental effort. So for example, a child sees a zebra and they've never seen one before. So by using a simulation, they may determine that it looks like something else they've seen before, just a little bit different. And they may think it is a horse. So that would be an example of assimilation. Accommodation, on the other hand, involves changing a pre existing idea to fit new information that has been gathered, and this is more advanced. Okay, so this is that difficult process. So let's imagine with the same example, the child recognizes that a zebra is different from a horse, and they start calling it something else. They start calling it a zebra. As you can imagine, an older child would be more likely to rely on accommodation, but a younger child is more likely to use assimilation. And if you've had a lot of experience, or maybe like a younger sibling, you would have seen personally kids using these processes, especially when they're really young. It may be seen as saying some silly things, but using assimilation a lot and assuming something is like something else. And as their brain gets more advanced and they develop further, they begin to understand this is something new that I don't know yet, and take in new information and separate it from the old information. So both of these processes help people to form a schema, which is basically a mental idea of what something is. So obviously we're going to develop a lot of these throughout our lives, and that all begins in childhood. All right, so next we'll look at the Piaget stages of cognitive development. Essentially, this is flawed, but this is old psychology. Piaget believed that every single individual, every single child went through the same four stages of cognitive development. So between you are expected to know these, and I remember having longer questions on the Piaget stages. So the sensory motor stage occurs from ages 0 to 2. And this is where, during the early stages, according to Piaget, infants are only aware of what is right in front of them. They can only focus on what they see, what they are doing, and what they're engaging with in their environment, and those physical interactions with their immediate environment. So they don't know yet how things react, and for that reason, they're always experimenting. They're likely to shake or throw things, put things in their mouth, and learn that way about the world, and also through trial and error. The later stages of the sensory motor stage include goal-oriented behavior that leads to some kind of a desired result. So the infants are exploring the world using senses and movement mainly. I've just discussed some of the behaviors they may exhibit, and eventually during this stage, we develop object permanence. So between the ages of about 7 to 9 months of this stage, as proposed by Piaget, infants begin to realize that an object still exists in the environment even though they cannot see it, feel it, or hear it. And this is known as object permanence. The fact that this starts to occur shows that memory is finally starting to develop in the infant at around this stage. And after infants start crawling, standing, and walking, their increased physical mobility leads to more cognitive development. And near the end of that sensory motor stage, at about 18 to 24 months, infants are able to reach another important milestone, which is early language development. Uh, and this is a sign that they're starting to develop some further abilities. Of course, this is going to be a slight overlap between each of the stages because these are not clearly defined margins of ages. An infant can finish, get through the sensory motor stage quicker than another. But it still kind of does fit into those time periods stated, of course. So the pre-operational stage is when the child is 2 to 7 years. And importantly about this stage, young children are starting to able to think about things symbolically. They begin to use symbolic thinking, the ability to use words and pictures to represent things that aren't there and understand it even if it's not there. They can imagine it even though it's not there. So this is imagination and symbolic thinking are the two important features of this stage. Their language use starts to become more mature, which started to develop during that sensory motor stage, but it's really happening in this pre-operational stage. They also develop memory and imagination, which allows them to understand the difference between things like the past and future and engage in make believe and pretend play. But their thinking is still going to be based on intuition at this stage, and it's not going to be completely logical. And they cannot grasp more complex concepts such as time, for example, or consequences of an action. Next, we have the concrete operational stage, which Piaget has proposed is from 7 to 12 years. So it's basically pre-adolescent children and elementary age. And this stage is important because the child starts to show logical and concrete reasoning during this stage. So children's thinking becomes less focused on themselves alone, less egotistical and about their own needs. They become increasingly aware of external events and they begin to realize that their own thoughts and feelings are unique to them alone, and may not be shared by others. And even that some things are imagined by them and they may not be real. So logic really starts to come out during this stage. However, most children during this stage still cannot think abstractly or hypothetically. This will only be in the formal operational stage. So this is still developing for them. So what they can do is imagine the consequences of an action without having to perform the action. So they can predict cause and consequence. They're able to classify objects based on common features and things like the conservation of mass. But then in the formal operational stage, 12 plus years, implying that it never exactly ends, is where those thought processes become more sophisticated, the most sophisticated. And abstract thinking, very importantly, occurs here, being able to understand something without seeing, visualizing, or experiencing it. So they can make hypotheses. They can make, I think if this happened, this would happen, and they may try to test that and find out. But now they can actually predict without experiencing it personally. So children are able to use symbols related to abstract concepts in this age group, such as things like algebra and science and maths. They can think about things in systematic ways and come up with theories or hypotheses, like I mentioned, and consider various possibilities. They can think about difficult concepts like justice that they wouldn't be able to previously. And I guess lastly, to finish up with this, although Piaget believed that there was lifelong intellectual growth, he did insist that the formal operational stage was the last. Okay, and he said that continued intellectual development into adulthood would depend on the buildup of knowledge. So these stages set the basis for that.